Andre and welcome to 10,000 Pictures. Today we're going to talk about aperture. The aperture is one of the three main elements of photography. It refers to the opening situated in the lens that the diaphragm controls. The light travels throughout this orifice and reaches the sensor. The logic is the same as the pupil in our eyes. It expands during dark situations to capture more light and shrinks while in lit circumstances. The diaphragm controls the size of the orifice where the light will travel to reach the sensor. The principle is simple. The further the diaphragm opens, the greater amount of light that sensitizes the film. Both the diaphragm and the shutter are independent entities. We must regulate them individually. They're inversely proportional, so when we set the camera to a high shutter speed, we need to widen the aperture to maintain the balance. The opposite is also true. If we close the aperture, we will have to slow down the shutter speed. So, a short exposure with a large opening proportionally receives the same amount of light as a long exposure on a small aperture. The aperture is measured in f-stops. The smaller the number, the bigger the aperture, and vice versa. So when we talk about an f1.8 aperture, we are referring to a wide opening. Consequently, an f22 setting indicates a very small aperture. That can be confusing at first because smaller numbers represent bigger apertures and greater numbers denote minor openings. So when we're taking pictures in dark places, the best way to take advantage of available light is to open your diaphragm to the highest aperture available. The number will vary from lens to lens, where cheaper ones will open less than those that are more sophisticated. Usually, new cameras come with a 1855 f35 5.6 lenses, what we can usually call kit lens, which means its maximum aperture is 3.5 on 18mm focal length or 5.6 on 55mm focal length. Good lenses are usually f2.8. Some can reach f1.8, 1.4 or even 1.2. We consider those to be fast lenses once they allow good amount of light inside the camera. They make it possible to take pictures in very low light situations without having to slow down your shutter speed too much. So, why don't we always leave the diaphragm open and just worry about the shutter speed? Well, using wide open diaphragms also comes with a downside. The aperture interferes with the depth of image's focus and level of detail. Small apertures will give you more DOF, depth of field, meaning that more planes in your image will be in focus. Consequently, if you're taking pictures with a very wide aperture and focusing on foreground, there is a good chance that your background will be out of focus. Most lenses will reach the minimum aperture of f22, and it's more than enough to produce sharp images with a very deep DOF. Generally, we use small apertures when we photograph landscapes, advertising pictures, or images that demand a high level of detail. We define depth of field by distance, so a shallow DOF means that only the plane of focus will be absolutely sharp in the image. Anything in front or behind of the plane of focus will lose sharpness as it moves further and further away from the focus point. On the other hand, deep DOFs indicates that more planes will be in focus. Having multiple planes with different levels of sharpness in your image will give a three-dimensional feel to the picture. When taking a portrait, it is desirable to have the background out of focus. That will make the subject stand out. In kit lenses, where the maximum aperture is f3.5, getting a nicer blur in the background can be tricky. Three factors emphasize the out of focus effect: the aperture, the focal length, and distance. So to get the best result possible, we'll have to take advantage of all three. First, zoom in to 55mm on your subject. It seems counterintuitive at first, since your maximum aperture will now be f5.6 instead of f3.5. But focal length plays a bigger role than the aperture on that matter. Now, move your subject as far as possible from the background to create separation between the plane of focus and the back plane. Those measures will ensure that the nice blurred background will frame your subject. When taking pictures in a studio with a strobe light, the aperture becomes more significant than the shutter speed. Since the camera only sees light for the amount of time that the flash fires, the shutter speed loses importance. The brightness of the picture will be defined by the aperture, ISO, and the flash power. So we established that the diaphragm opens and closes the hole in the back of the lens. allowing more or less light to be in touch with the sensor. We also noted that the measurement for aperture is in f-stops, as well as inversely proportional to the shutter speed. Therefore, when we open the diaphragm, we must switch to a shorter exposure time to maintain the balance. The lens defines the f number, where the most common will work in the f3.5 to f5.6 range. More advanced lenses can reach f1.2, which allows a great amount of light to enter the camera and produce a very shallow DOF. Wide aperture produces shallow depth of focus, which means that less planes will look sharp in a photo. We can use this to our advantage in a portrait. In a landscape image, for example, try to close your diaphragm to reach a higher level of detail. It is important to understand aperture and know how to manipulate and familiarize yourself with it. In addition, take note of the aperture priority mode on your camera. It's AV for Canon and A for Nikon. It will allow you to focus on f-stops without having to worry about the shutter speed and our next week's subject, the ISO. In the meantime, practice your aperture. Share your studies in the comments and stay tuned for our next posts. Please share this post with your friends, subscribe, and be part of the conversation. Thank you, and see you next time on 10,000 Pictures.